Jacqueline Bennett loved being a scrapper. There was a unique sense of peace and tranquility in sitting against the backdrop of deep space, with only the tiny pinpricks of starlight breaking the inky darkness. Those same stars not only dispelled the myth of her working in an abyss, but also gave her an orientation to adhere to while working. The derelicts she loved would spin and tumble, sometimes in unusual ways, and so one could easily lose their bearings if they did not pay attention. Her favorite pastime, while floating between her small ship and yet another potential payday, was to trace patterns in those stars for guidance. It not only helped her keep her orientation, but it reminded her of Pa teaching her the constellations late at night, long after her mother thought she was in bed. Now Pa was gone, buried on the farm he loved so much, but she got to keep this small memory alive every time she traced a new pattern. Her current sector, and current goal, was labeled as GG14-512A, but she liked to call it the graveyard. At one point, some long time past, a great battle had been fought here and one of the sides had lost. Jacqueline could probably look up who it was, who had won, and the long-term ramifications of that loss, but she did not particularly care. Instead, she only cared that the battle had been fought at all. It was a morbid outlook to take, reveling and rejoicing in the mass death that stretched almost a light year in all directions, but it was a necessary one for the work. She explained this to all who ultimately signed up with her, as she would not tolerate the squeamish or the superstitious when it came to this job. Their paychecks were built on tombs, blood spilled either out of malice, accidents, or simply an indifferent universe, it did not matter. All that mattered was that without those tombs, there would be no scrappers. Some took it better than others. And so here she was, floating between a derelict and her own ship, the misplaced trinket, ready to rob another grave for anything that shone, or blinked, in the darkness. She held fast to her tether, as she oriented herself against the running dog and the angry octopus constellations to make sure she could remember her orientation. She then checked her oxygen, internal power, and finally opened a comlink to the ship. "Big Mama, this here is Lil Digger, doing a final comms check, over," she said while comically putting her hand to the side of her helmet. She liked to think it helped with the transmission, but deep down she just thought it looked cool. "This is Big Mama," came the exasperated response, one that caused Jacqueline to smile. "I can see you clearly out the window, and you're coming in clear. As you should know, since we did a comms check before you jumped." "Don't be like that, Tuckty," Jacqueline responded good-naturedly while dropping her hand away from her helmet to grab onto the rapidly approaching ship. Grasping hard onto an outcropping, she quickly activated the magnetic couplings on her boots, and smiled in satisfaction as the thunk reverberated through her suit. "This is a big one," she said as she tested the magnetic strength. "You never know what lives here could be haunted." The silence on the other end gave Jacqueline a moment to do a quick scan for the control panel to cycle the airlock. She hoped that the power signals they had read would be enough to have them open automatically, rather than the tedious and tiresome manual opening that was otherwise required. If it did open, that would be a good indicator of a still functional reactor, meaning that other equipment might still work. While good credit could be had for non-functional equipment, it paled in comparison to functional. A good haul could keep the ship flying for months, or her belly full for even longer. It was always a gamble, and that was part of what she loved. Sometimes the ship choices, or even the sector choices, panned out and they made good money. Sometimes a crew member would quit after a good payday, and she would be flush with enough coin to hire on another hand. However, sometimes the haul could best be described as a nuclear-powered microwave, and was worth more for the raw components than the actual equipment itself. Even then, money was money, and even if all it did was give you enough fuel and food to go back out and try again with a fuel warning light and a grumbly belly. "If you are done joking," Tuckty said, suddenly returning to the comms and pulling her out of her reverie, "the paperwork seems to have been accepted. Congratulations, you now own," and Jacqueline could hear the emphasis on the last word, "Sector GG14-512A. Did you put it down as the graveyard?" Jacqueline asked, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. A low growl of frustration came over the link before Tuckty added, I cannot rename the sector, Jules. The irritation returning to his voice. But it's so fitting, Jacqueline protested as she bent down to remove a panel. Found our way in, she quickly added on as she revealed the access port for the airlock. She cycled the computer screen and smiled at herself when it powered on. Seems that there might be enough power for the airlock. That's odd, Tuckty answered. Jacqueline paused and instinctively turned to look back at the misplaced trinket. What's up? The power readings did not indicate enough for an airlock to work properly, Tuckty answered. Something strange is going on here. Spooky, Jacqueline whispered ominously into the microphone, and was rewarded with a huff. I'm going to review the readings, Tuckty said curtly, his voice indignant and frustrated. Call me if you find something interesting. Like ghosts? Jacqueline said as she started praying while keying in various combinations that had worked on previous versions of these derelicts. Scrappers tended to work together as best as they could, and any time someone made a major find, like a forgotten access code or an untapped sector, they would usually post up the information on a network for others to find. Sometimes those codes worked, but sometimes they activated security protocols. It was a risk. After continued silence on the other end, Jacqueline teased, Spoil sport, but then let it drop. She couldn't blame Tuckty too much for being nervous out here. Outside of the fabricated dangers she was enjoying pushing on him, made all the more entertaining with a human's notoriety for superstitious behavior, there were very real challenges to the work. Ancient battlefields lent themselves to far more realistic dangers than imaginary specters haunting the halls of long-dead ships. A small bump could send pieces of space debris moving so fast that they could punch a hole through an environment suit, or even a ship, and all without any warning. Still, duty called, and she wasn't going to let the chance of a bullet fired over 100 years ago distract her from her work. She continued to try various commands and open instructions with little success until suddenly, with barely a scrape, the door opened. Jacqueline jerked backwards, trying to avoid any debris in case of depressurization, but was glad to see nothing exiting at high speeds. I'm in, Tuckty, she said quickly into the microphone before dropping her way into the hatch. Getting the first one open was sometimes the easy part. The drain on the power could cause the other door to fail, or, under worse conditions, cause a cascade in a failing reactor, leading to an explosion. She had lost a crew member that way once. They never found the body. Still, there was no payday without the risk, and without the payday there was no food. Good, Tuckty said. Keep me apprised. And then the radio clicked off again. Either he's in a bad mood, or I accidentally made him nervous, Jacqueline mused to herself as she began the cycling procedure to get the inner door open. She had never taken the Winsel for a superstitious bunch, in fact that seemed to abhor religion of all sorts, but he still seemed on edge. Or maybe that was what annoyed him, she thought. She was acting too superstitious, and he didn't like that. She shrugged and decided to give him first pick of the salvage as an apology. He had been with her for only a few months, and he was good at his work, so she would hate to lose him. After another moment of prodding, the doors cycled, and rather than being greeted by the cold depths of a dark and probably not haunted spaceship, Jacqueline instead saw the welcoming lights of emergency power. She cycled the door again, then stomped deeper into the ship until she got to a power terminal. She poked a few buttons and saw that this whole section appeared to have more power than the signatures were giving off. Strange, she muttered to herself. She keyed her comms. Tuckty? No answer. Tuckty? She tried again, but there was still no answer. Tuckty? She asked again, nervous tension coming into her voice. Either he was mad, or something far more sinister was going on here. We have incoming, came the reply, catching her completely off guard. What? Another growl of frustration, but this one not directed at her. We are being hunted, I think. Something is coming in so hot they're throwing up enough heat that I can see them coming in real time. I'm not sure of who it could be as we definitely claimed this sector. Pirates? Jacqueline tried to offer up helpfully. In a graveyard? Tuckty answered. We aren't near any major shipping lanes. In fact, history lesson says that this site was specifically chosen for the battle because of how far out it was. Odd, Jacqueline said as she tapped some more commands into the keyboard in front of her. A basic query revealed no further information on what could be so interesting about this specific ship. There were thousands of them strewn all throughout this space, and this derelict wasn't even the biggest one. Want me to come back out? I'll keep you apprised, Tukti said. Could be a heritage site that we missed on the analysis. I'll go straight for the power cores then, no sightseeing, Jacqueline said. I would hate to disturb someone's actual graveyard. Good hunting, Tukti answered. I'll let you know more as I know more. And the line disconnected. Jacqueline liked to put up a brave face every time she stepped into a derelict, but the truth was that it still deeply unsettled her. There had been a not insignificant number of times that she had opened a door on a long-dead spaceship only to be greeted by an inhabitant, long dead, just on the other side of a door. Flesh doesn't rot in space, she learned that early on, but that also means it preserves all the death throes you go through on your way out. Scratch marks on the walls, tears around the suit's throat as the oxygen runs out, or even the still visible trail of blood that could be easily traced to the hole in the wall. One day, she knew, one of those suits could be her if she kept this up. Still, there was work to do, and so she pressed onwards. Each footfall echoing inside her own suit as her boots kept her firmly rooted to the floor of the slowly spinning ship. Each footfall bringing her one step closer to, hopefully, a huge payday, or at least another chance to try again. The walls and doorways passed by slowly, each one looming into existence and fading back out again as she passed. Doorways and hallways that led to either small rooms, or more darkness just waiting to swallow the unwary. She had just paused to glance in one of those rooms when, upon turning back, she saw her nightmare had materialized in front of her. There, in the middle of the hallway, a shape loomed. It was far enough back into the shadows that she couldn't make out who or what it was, and the thoughts of forbidden combat AI, or even ghosts, flickered briefly through her mind before it settled back on yet another screaming, pleading face that she would have to push past. Then, a limb moved. She almost screamed when it moved, as it had done so without any sort of outside interference that she knew would be required. Either it was a defunct combat AI, or some other nightmare had descended upon her. Then she saw the gun, and confusion replaced the fear. The gun shifted, as if indicating her arms, and she slowly held them out, then up, to show she was unarmed. The body turned slightly, then motioned again with the gun as if telling her to march ahead of it. She hesitated, and the gun insisted, so she pushed forward, her mind now filled with images of smugglers, drug runners, or even a black cell. As she marched past the suited form, and then started down the hallway, her mind struggled to process the unfolding event. This was definitely not a heritage site. It could be smugglers, but why in a derelict so far from everything? The fuel costs alone would have to make it one of the more illegal substances. Slaves? Her stomach dropped, but then she rationalized that one out again as having similar problems to the drugs but compounded with food and water. Finally, they arrived at a doorway and she was forced to stop. A limb reached around her and flipped open a panel, revealing a keypad. A few digits were pressed, and the door slid open to reveal an airlock. The figure pushed her inside and cycled the doors. When the other one opened, Jacqueline was prepared for everything except for what she saw, a village. What in the? Jacqueline whispered as she took a moment to glance around. Village was really all that she could use to describe it. It was a Aquallian's village, that much was obvious by the inhabitants, but what it was doing way out here was something she was struggling to process. She was nowhere near the Ascendancy's area of space, and this was not what she understood their homes to look like. They were a highly technologically adept society, and this place looked simple by even Earth standards. The figure behind her strode around and took off their helmet, revealing another Aquallian's. They were taller than Jacqueline, and their feathered scales were smoothed down in anxiety. The nostrils on the end of their snout flared slightly as they breathed, another sign of agitation and anger. The pistol in their hand, however, did not waver, and so whatever anxiety they felt was easily under control. "Who are you?" they demanded. Jacqueline took that moment to take off her own helmet in a sign of friendliness. She did so, and tried to give him her most heartwarming smile. "The name's Jacqueline Bennett," she said, and added a quick wave to the gathering crowd as she brushed some of her hair out of her face. "I'm a scrapper." The Aquallians didn't relax their weapon as they responded. "Zakoras," with a quick nod. Then they asked again. "What are you doing here?" Jacqueline frowned. "Well," she started to say and then hesitated. Finally she shrugged. "I'm a scrapper?" Zakoras cocked their head to one side in confusion, their eyes blinking rapidly. Forgive me," they said after a moment. "Let me try again. Why are you here on this ship specifically?" "I'm a scrapper," Jacqueline said, struggling to understand why this conversation seemed to be going so right, and so wrong, at the same time. She glanced around at the rest of the room and saw the anxiety written across the faces of the others assembled there. The more she looked, however, the more the entire space unsettled her. There was too little technology here, too little of the creature comforts she understood the Aquallians to take for granted. Zakoras reached up and tapped a smaller piece and then shook their head. They stood still for a moment, seeming to collect their thoughts before asking, "What are you looking for on this ship?" "I was hoping to scavenge for some still-working technology," Jacqueline said, deciding that a detailed explanation was more in order at this point. "Metal, tech, hell, even expired rations would do," she added with a shrug. "This is how I make my money." "I see," Zakoras said, nodding their head in understanding. "You are a scrap finder." "I apologize. Our translators are out of date. We don't get your type of visitors, you see." Something clicked for Jacqueline at that point. "Oh my God, you're deviants!" she shouted before she could stop herself. Zakoras frowned, but slowly nodded. "We do not agree with the term, but yes. We are trying to wean ourselves off technological dependency." "But why here?" Jacqueline said, waving her hand at the obvious metal walls and tunnels of the ship. "This is technology. I agree that it is not the most beneficial environment," Zakoras said with a frown. "But we must start somewhere." He turned and indicated far exterior part of the room. "There are the medical facilities we need to remove implants and other dependencies." He turned to another part. "And there leads to a sector where we are able to grow food and other necessities." He then turned back and nodded politely. "This ship was preserved by others of like mindset for that purpose. Some you see around you are here permanently, helping those of us who are transient to find our way to other worlds." "Why don't you just move to a frontier world then?" Jacqueline asked. She knew she did not understand the full implications of the Deviants, but that seemed to be a more logical answer than this self-imposed exile. The Ascendancy was a little embarrassed by the Deviants, considering them an outlaw sect, but this felt extreme. "The implants are Zakoras paused, searching for the right word. "A shackle on the people, I guess you could say. We are given them for free but must remove them at a price." He smiled, a gesture made all the more cold and unsettling by the fine row of sharp teeth he sported. "They say it is for our own good. We believe it to be a form of wage slavery, as I believe your people would call it." The ship that was burning hot to head this direction suddenly recalled itself in Jacqueline's mind. She pursed her lips. "What happens if the Ascendancy finds you?" "We are taken back to Origin where our fee is tallied, and any removed implants reinstalled. Then we are given back our old jobs, but with a guard." Zakoras grimaced. "They call it reintegrating into society. We call it servitude." "And if you can't pay back the debt?" Jacqueline asked nervously. "Then our children incur half the remaining debt," Zakoras said. "While the remainder is forgiven." He bared his teeth. "We believe we should have more opportunity to forge our own lives, rather than be forced into a path a computer determined." As in on cue, Jacqueline's comlink beeped, and she heard Tukti whisper in her ear. "Jacqueline, we have a problem." Jacqueline looked up at Zakoras and held up a hand. She keyed the microphone to play on exterior speakers and said, "Go ahead, Tukti." "The predator is here," Tukti answered. "Looks like Ascendancy. They'll be in comms range soon." Zakoras bared his teeth aggressively. "You he hissed as he raised the gun to point at Jacqueline's head. Wait, Jacqueline said. Wait, I didn't bring them here. I'm just a scrapper. Yes, Zakoras said. A tech hunter. We are a tech species. A convenient name, he said as he pushed the barrel forward until it pressed against Jacqueline's head. A convenient lie, human. Wait, Jacqueline said and keyed the comms again. I can help. Zakoras slightly pulled back the barrel. How? Tukti, Jacqueline said loudly, leaving the microphone on broadcast. What? Tukti answered, his voice still nervous. Do we have any contractor agreements? What? Tukti asked again, confusion replacing nervous tension. Do we have any up-to-date contractor agreements, you ginormous furball? Jacqueline hissed loudly, her anger and fear getting the better of her. We have a very lucrative opportunity here, but we have basically no time. There was a pause, and then the pained and confused voice of Tukti came over the comms. Yes? I need you to make duplicates, Jacqueline said. A lot of duplicates, and send them over to me. She turned to Zakoras, who was regarding her with confusion. Species, Aquallians, this sector, etc. As much pre-filled as you can. Boilerplate agreement with blank name and signature slots. Can you do that? Sure, Tukti responded, the pain in his voice being replaced by confusion. Jules, what happened? We're about to help some people and maybe make a lot of money, Tukti, she said. Zakoras, Jacqueline said, turning towards him. I need you to gather your people. You're all about to become salvage contractors. Zakoras nodded and turned to begin gathering the adults of the small, floating village. Fortunately, word had already traveled fast, and most of those that could easily be gathered were already on their way over. Jacqueline then met with each of them, one at a time, and explained what she was trying to do. She explained the risks, the potential rewards, and most of all their obligations. She explained it was voluntary, but it would mean they had some measure of legal protection. Every single adult signed the paperwork. The last few were reading their papers and putting down their signatures when Jacqueline's comms went off. We are being hailed by the Admiral, Tukti said, the nervous tension returning to his voice. All right, Jacqueline said. Tukti, I want you to finish printing out each of these contracts. We need hard copies that we can pass over to the Ascendancy so they have something tangible. Everyone loves tangible. She turned to Zakoras and added into the comms. Also, get me their frequency, and tell them that we are patching in from the ship. Zakoras motioned. This way, he said as he moved back towards another part of the village. He led Jacqueline through a maze of corridors until they came out into another large room that looked like an old communications hub. The screens were all in good order, and Zakoras motioned to one in particular. This one, he said. It is the local communicator. Great, Jacqueline said, and her communicator blinked. She pulled up the frequency channel and keyed it in before turning back to Zakoras. I hope this works. You have already done more than most, Zakoras said with a deep, respectful bow. I hope it's enough, Jacqueline said, then hesitated. Thank you for trusting me, she added. No matter how this goes, thank you. And then she activated the communicator. The screen blinked, rippled, and then flared to life. The first thing she was greeted with was the stoic, well-manicured face of an Ascendancy admiral. Their feathers were preened and cleaned, perfectly slicked back in a display of supreme confidence. Their eyes were unblinking and fixed in a dominant display of authority. Jacqueline of the misplaced trinket, the admiral said. You are not what I expected to find. Jacqueline bowed deeply, something she had picked up on during her crash course on Aquallian's culture. Admiral, you are not what I expected to find either. Then we stand on flat ground, the admiral said, allowing a slight smile to reveal their teeth before returning to their impassive stare. We were most pleased when our listening post reported a warp signature. We had hoped to have captured one of their smugglers, but this is much more fortunate. They paused suddenly and glanced somewhere off-screen before returning the gaze to the communicator. I have just been informed that the Aquallian standing behind you is definitively one of our missing citizens. Are you safe and well? Yes, they have been a most fortuitous find, Jacqueline said, picking her words carefully. She glanced back at Zakoras, who looked a little concerned at the comment, and nodded. The reward money, of course, the Admiral said, and waved a hand. We can communicate with your associate on the particulars of your banking, and get it transferred over. Of course, Jacqueline said. And the contract fee as well. The Admiral hesitated, then turned back to the screen. We are no longer on flat ground, they said, a hint of confusion creeping into their voice. Oh, my apologies, Jacqueline said, bowing deeply again. You will have to pay to break their contract. Like I said, they were a most fortuitous find. You are a hill and I am a valley, the Admiral said as they leaned forward and blinked once. I have salvage rights on this entire sector, Jacqueline said with pride as she waved her hand to indicate the entire ship, as well as imply everything beyond it. No one wanted a several hundred-year-old ruin that most assumed to be picked over, but I saw opportunity. We remain as we were, the Admiral said, blinking again. They reclined back into their chair and waited. Jacqueline keyed a message over to Tukti and then smiled back at the Admiral. As I said, I have salvage rights here. As I am sure you know, this is an enormous sector, filled with more scrap than I could ever hope to salvage. So imagine my surprise and good fortune when I came across a group of Aquallians who needed work. Tukti should have just sent over the particulars. The Admiral sat back up, their hard, unblinking gaze returning. What have you done? Jacqueline smiled and turned to Zakoras. Zakoras, am I correct in that, until you have been tried and your fine assessed, you are without jobs? That is correct, Zakoras said with a small bow. Jacqueline turned back to the Admiral. So in other words, I found a whole group of free agents. She shrugged. I had an entire sector, and not enough manpower to salvage it, and here are a bunch of people willing, and happy, to work for me. In other words, Admiral, all of these people are my employees. The Admiral hissed, and then their head jerked as someone off-screen said something again. They listened for a few moments, then turned back towards Jacqueline. How much would it cost to relieve you of this responsibility? It's all in the contract, Jacqueline said, knowing now that she had them. But the short version is that I contracted them for 200,000 credits worth of salvage, with the difference being paid up in cash should the contract be broken. Seeing as how they all just signed it, per Terran Federation law, you would owe me around 84 million credits, Admiral. That is an impossible sum to salvage, Jacqueline of Bennett, the Admiral hissed, snapping their teeth in anger and frustration. Jacqueline shrugged. Contracts can be renegotiated every 12 moon cycles per Terran Federation custom. Should the stated value wind up being too high, then we can come to a new agreement based upon the current state of the contract zone. The Admiral and Jacqueline stared each other down for several long moments. Neither of them moved, but Jacqueline could see the Admiral's eyes flick occasionally, indicating they were listening to others speaking. Most likely doing cursory contract review, Jacqueline assumed. Finally, the Admiral held up a hand and refocused on Jacqueline. Say I disagree with the terms of your contract, the Admiral said, but Jacqueline could tell that they were negotiating now. How would I go about contesting this? I believe the Assembly allows representative states to negotiate on where laws might disagree, Jacqueline said as she moved her arm behind her back to give Zakoras a thumbs up. But do we really want to do that? Think of the opportunity for yourself, Admiral. What opportunity is that? The Admiral asked coolly. A new chance at dealing with this problem, Jacqueline said with a smile. The Deviants aren't just going to accept returning, correct? Correct, the Admiral said with a nod. So they're going to try and escape again, correct? I think I stand atop your hill, the Admiral said. We are spending more money catching them than we would save if we were to just allow them to freelance, as I believe you Terrans put it. Exactly, Jacqueline said. But we can meet in the middle. Allow them the chance to go be contractors. They'll be contract bound, at least in the Terran Federation, and if they break it then you can go pick them up and return them to Origin. At which point, they will have the original contract, and the new one to pay off. Too high a debt to take that risk. We rid ourselves of a problem by giving it to someone else. the Admiral said with a smile. How delightfully Terran. Very well. You have signed these contracts, but as Aquallian's ascendancy representative, I invoke the right to review this contract to ensure it is mutually beneficial to all parties. They are bound to you, but we may have modifications we wish to make on the particulars. I stand by you on your hill, Jacqueline said with a deep bow. And I yours, the Admiral said. We look forward to working with you, Misplaced Trinkets and Company. And the line disconnected. Jacqueline took a moment and breathed. Her legs shook as the adrenaline began to slowly work its way into her system, and her fight-or-flight response began to run rampant with her ability to sit still. After another moment, she felt calm enough to key up the comms link and page Tucty. Hey Tucty? She asked, her voice still a little shaky. Yeah? Came the nervous yet relieved response. Do you have the paperwork necessary to form an LLC?